me. You are listening to PT on Ice, The Older Adult, a collaboration between the Senior Rehab Project and the Institute of Clinical Excellence. This is a rebroadcast of an original episode that can be found at ptonice.com.
Hello, everybody. Christina Previtt here for the older adult version of PT on Ice. Today, I thought we would start talking a little bit about self-limiting beliefs. So I titled this, Who is Telling You You Can't? And the reason why this topic came to me was because Dustin and I, who are presenting at CSM at the end of this month, we're talking about take-home messages. Take-home messages for clinicians, take-home messages for some of our clients, and what are we trying to portray to somebody? This is totally all of his big grand thinking that they can take away, and we hope that they remember 3 to 5 years from now. And one of the things that really stuck out in my mind is this idea behind our own biases as clinicians and some of our biases that we see in our clients about what they can and cannot do because they are X age. And so one of the things that we wanted to really impose upon everyone who's in attendance for Old Not Week, which is on the Friday at 11 a.m. for CSM in New Orleans, is about how sometimes our own perceptions of what a person should or should not be able to do because they are 70 or 75 or 80 can actually potentially cause us to underdose exercise programs or underestimate the abilities of our clients, and we may not be getting these optimal results that we are looking for. And I thought one of the amazing things, so I was looking at some of these biases and what other people were talking about when we were looking at ageist cultures and these perceptions. And there was a study that got released on a website called ageismore.com. And I'm going to read the stats. So this is a Canadian statistic. And it said that half of Canadians over the age of 77 say that younger people automatically assume that older people can't do things for themselves. I'm going to read that one again because I think it was so powerful, and what that means for us as clinicians can be huge. So half of Canadians over the age of 77 say that younger people automatically assume that older people can't do things for themselves. And what can that look like? It can look like when we're in a treatment session, we automatically give them a 1 to 2 hand assist without properly looking at their assessment parameters. So if we're doing a functional assessment and we can see that they can independently sit to stand, why are we helping them up? Or why are we allowing them to use arms instead of challenging them to not use their arms for different functional tasks? So those are some of the examples of how we can be imposing self-limiting beliefs on individuals in our clinic. And so how do we start to combat some of these self-limiting beliefs? And one of the things that we talk about a lot in the modern management of the older adult course is doing an appropriate, specific functional assessment for the client that we are seeing in front of us. And what do we mean by that? So an example that we've talked about on the podcast is a short physical performance battery, where we are testing people on strength with a 5-time sit to stand test. We're looking at balance, going from side to side stance, semi-tandem and tandem stance, potentially even progressing to a single leg stand. And then we're doing a gait speed assessment. And even just that short, it probably takes 3 to 4 minutes to complete. We can get a pretty good idea about how somebody is doing. Dustin talks about some of the floor transfer tests that we can also start looking at so that we can potentially get people on and off the floor and not assume that they aren't able to do it. And one of the things that I think is really great about this, because as a culture, I think we're starting to challenge some of these self-limiting beliefs about different functional capacities over time, is that the marathon records are being broken most consistently in the 60 plus age categories. And one, how, like over, like, let's say 10, 20 years ago, one of the things is we never really saw a ton of individuals in their 60s, 70s, and 80s wanting to still compete in high level sport. We didn't see them completing things like the marathon because, you know, they're 60 years old and they shouldn't be running and all these things, which are completely wrong. And people are challenging that bias every single day, which is so amazing. And therefore, we're seeing more people in these races. And so more potential for those records to be broken. And they're being broken every single year, which I think is fantastic. As a researcher in the aging community, we have done a pretty good job over the last 20 to 30 years of trying to characterize what is normal aging. We've started identifying things like clinical geriatric syndromes, which we would kind of consider a more abnormal trajectory or a trajectory that has complications in it. So we're not optimally aging to the highest level of physical function that we can. And what that has translated into is the statistics of how much functional decline we can expect to see in different individuals at different ages. An example is for individuals who are 50 and older, we're going to start to see a decline in muscular strength. And the estimates are between 1% and 2%, with power being slightly more than that. And then once we get to the age of 70, we are starting to see more of an acceleration. As much as we are seeing age-related declines, what I think we haven't done very well as researchers just yet, and they are in the works, and this is going to be really relevant to us as clinicians who are working in private practice or working in SNFs or hospitals, is we haven't been able to characterize people who are lifelong athletes and who are continuing to prescribe to certain exercise parameters in order to get the top end of that normal. What I mean by that is when we're looking at research and we're using some of these averages to give ourselves clinical implications, we're not looking at the variance all the time. And so we say, yes, on average, people lose 1% to 2% of their strength over each year after the age of 50. But that's the average. So there are people who are losing more than 1% to 2%, but there are also people who are losing less. And so for the people that are losing less, how are they doing that? Like, what are they doing? What are some of those optimal parameters that they're using? And if you're seeing one of those people who are still active, they're challenging themselves in their exercise programs. They still want to run marathons at 70. They're still running in CrossFit gyms across the US and Canada and globally. How are we treating them? Are we saying the same type of self-limiting beliefs that we have in our mind about what a person who is 70 years old is supposed to look like? Are we doing that in our practice? And I challenge myself to that all the time. Am I putting too high expectations on my clients? Am I putting too low expectations on my clients? Am I meeting them where they're at and not letting the fact that they are 75 years of age cloud what I think that they're able to do? That's not saying that for some people who have just come out of hospital or who have different chronic conditions that we need to be considerate of, that it's not to say that we are overdosing them. But I would say as a collective in the geriatric space, underdosing of exercise programs is probably a little bit more of an epidemic than overdosing of some of our clients. And so I talk about this a lot, and Dustin and I really believe in some of this ageist sentiment because I think that it's really important to check our own biases first and then start talking to our clients about their own self-limiting beliefs. And for that, I think there's a lot of things that come into play. And with geriatrics, I always think it's really interesting because a lot of the course offerings that ICE has really tie in together in a geriatric population. Things like pain education and some of these psychosocial considerations and some of the fitness athlete stuff all comes in together with a more complex medical history so that the way that we apply some of these interventions is still appropriate, but we're looking at our functional ability of the person that's in front of us with a slightly more complicated medical history. Okay, so when we're talking about self-limiting beliefs, where do we think that this is coming from? When I'm talking to my client about what they think they're able to do, a really common thing that comes into our conversations is, Christina, I am X years old, or I am 67, or I'm 85, or I'm 92. And when I get that question, I think it's fantastic because it's a great time for us to have a conversation, because at the end of the day, usually what I say is, so what? Because I don't want them to think just because they're X age that we aren't going to be able to do things. It might just modify the way that we do things. It might modify how quickly we progress certain exercises. And obviously a medical history might make it so that certain goals are not attainable or not realistic. But I don't want the person to think just because they're a certain age that is the limiter to their beliefs. A common way that we see this being demonstrated in the healthcare system is with pain. A lot of people, especially in our healthcare field, and I know that sometimes I can be a little bit guilty of this, is that we expect that because we have wear and tear on our joints as we get older, that pain might be something that's inevitable and something that we can't do anything about. And so I had a client come in and she was talking about her sister-in-law. So she was in her 60s. Her sister-in-law was in her late 50s, and she was seeing a physiotherapist for back-related issues. And the physiotherapist said to her, well, you're 57, Doris. You're going to have some pain. Like, your pain isn't going to go away. You've done 57 years of damage on your back. And this was the verbiage that she used. And one, I was shocked because we're kind of feeding into that nocebo effect, but also that was the physiotherapist imposing a self-limiting belief on her because she was saying that because she was a certain age, that she was inevitably going to have pain. Accelerate 40 years, and I had another client who came in who was in her early 90s, and she had arthritis in her one hip. And so she kept going to the doctors and she kept saying, my hip is really hurting me. I don't know what to do about it. Can we get x-rays? All that type of thing. And her physicians kept saying, well, Clarice, I think I'm going Silence of the Lambs here. Your hip is 90 years old. And this individual, I don't know if I've told this story before, but this individual came up to her physician and said, I have two hips that are 92 years old. One of them is hurting. So obviously that there is something going on. And so she challenged that physician with his self-limiting beliefs about what to expect and how to manage her because of her age. And I think that we as physiotherapists need to be that advocate. We need to be the advocate just like that individual. And sometimes pain will not go away completely. I can totally acknowledge that. But I think that every single person has the ability to improve, whether they are 55 or 85 or 105, because there's always something that we can do, and movement is always going to be powerful. And there is a study that was done in 1991 by Fiatorni out of Italy, who had individuals in their 90s who were wheelchair bound that they put into an 2 times a week, 30-minute sessions of resistance training, and the average increase in cross-sectional area of their quad muscle was over 200%. So that is in their 90s, which means that people always have the ability to improve. And so today I am challenging you to think about your own self-limiting beliefs. Have that time, reflect back, and think, when you see a person who's in their 70s, what is the first thing that goes into your head? When you see a person who's in their 80s, what is the first thing that goes into your head? If you see a person that's in their 30s, what do you think about their recovery? And is some of that because of experience? Is it because of culture? Is it because of environment? Is it accurate? Can you challenge it? I want you guys to think about some of that, reflect on some of those ideologies, and comment below. What do you guys think? All right. That is it for today for the PT on Ice podcast. If anybody is around CSM at the end of the month, I hope that you come and say hi to Justin and myself. Our session is the Friday from 11 to 1. It's called Old Not Week 2.0. We are halfway through the first inaugural session of the Modern Management of the Older Adult course, and our second round starts at the end of March 27th, I believe. So if you want to hop on board, signups are already underway, and we hope to see you guys either at CSM or preferably in the Modern Management course. Bye, guys.
Hit me. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, go to ptonice.com, click on the courses tab, and check out Modern Management of the Older Adult. This is a course that myself and Christina Previtt are going to be teaching. It's 8 weeks, an online format, interactive, and solely focused on helping students change how they practice and how they work with older adults. For more information, just go to ptonice.com. Thanks.